Welcome to the Woodturning Workshop. Today's project is a kitchen scoop. It'll involve a little bit of spindle turning and a little bit of hollowing, a very traditional project in the woodturning world. And speaking of the woodturning world, when we come back, I'm going to introduce you to somebody who's been very influential in that world, Ron Fleming. He helped bring woodturning from a craft to an art.
And now the leaves just start from the very center of the vessel.
Stay tuned. One of the best reasons to join a woodturning club is the opportunity to exchange ideas and techniques with fellow turners. The club I belong to has many talented turners, and one of the most gifted and well-known is Ron Fleming. He has pieces in galleries all over the United States. He even has a piece in the White House Permanent Collection. And this is where Ron creates all of his incredible work, Hearthstone. It's his home, his studio, his inspiration. Believe it or not, this once was an old city incinerator. You can even see the smokestacks. Ron and his late wife Patty spent several years renovating it to create this extraordinary place. And once you step inside, you'll also understand just how talented and remarkable Ron Fleming is. Hearthstone is just one of those places you have to visit to really appreciate the beauty of. And Ron, I really appreciate you letting us come by today and visit.
You're more than welcome.
Now this is a guy who got me inspired and got me started wood turning. He's an incredibly talented man. I mean, you've been an illustrator, right?
Right.
For how long?
40 years.
40 years.
Yeah.
And you're obviously into interior design a little bit.
Yes, just a little.
Yeah, and this was not an easy project, renovating an old incinerator, was it?
No, it took us 2 years to renovate it.
Yeah. And I heard there's a little bit of work downstairs.
Well, it took us a year to get the ashes out.
Well, about 10 foot of ashes in the basement?
Yeah, about 10 feet.
Well, obviously the thing we're here to talk about today is your wood turning.
Right.
And you really were one of the pioneers who helped take wood turning from a craft to an art. You really got into taking it just past a turned vessel. How did that all come about?
Well, you know, when you get into any field, the first thing they tell you is not to copy somebody else.
Yeah.
So I've been around nature all my life, and I kind of lean towards that as my inspiration. So all my work is inspired by, you know, nature.
Ron, this looks a little bit like a chronological history lesson of your wood turning experience.
Well, I've got a lot of old work that I've saved and held back, and I've got a lot of work that's getting ready to go to a show, and some in between. So,
but which piece shows where you started?
This is probably the most earliest piece that I've been able to hang on to, and a fellow out in California was doing carving around his pieces, and his theory was to decorate the top edge to invite somebody to look in the vessel. Mm-hmm. So that's why I started doing that. And it's just kind of like leaves evolving up out of the vessel. So I kind of evolved from that to these pieces like this, where I just started all the way down the vessel, and now the leaves just start from the very center of the vessel.
Yeah, so you don't have a foot like everybody else does. You continue the whole thing all the way through, and it's a foot in its own right. But
and the reason I did that is because you're always kind of wanting to put a signature to your work. It's different from everybody else's.
Right.
And I had a patron one time ask me when I did a piece similar to this, what'd you do on the bottom? Well, it was just flat like everybody else's, but it got me to thinking, and that's where I started going to the center.
You know, I look at that and I know it's a Ron Fleming, but when we look at the work over here, I'm really impressed in that these came out about a year ago at the last show of yours you had, and you broke your mold. You did something completely different than I've ever seen you do, and no matter how many years you have at this, you got to keep reinventing yourself, don't you?
I keep breaking the mold, as you say. These were pieces that I've been to Africa twice, and each time I go there, I come back with all this new inspiration. And this was inspired by some paintings that some Africans were doing on some big panels and on the side of their home. And also, if you look at an alligator or crocodile real close, their
Yeah.
back is kind of like that.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, why don't I use that as a technique?
I noticed you've kept one thing that you had in the very beginning, though. On this piece, you have something inside of it.
Right.
And you're still trying to get the person to look inside the vessel.
Still trying to get them to look inside the vessel.
That is really, really cool. Ron, I've always been a little bit jealous of your studio. You have so much room in here, it's amazing.
Well, I'd like to have it bigger, but you know, when you got a lathe this size, it takes up a lot of space.
Yeah, now I gotta admit, now this is a lathe. How big is this?
Well, when I first got it, my wife said that was my new pickup truck. But it'll swing 54 inches by 4 feet.
Whoa.
So, you know, you can get big with it if you want to. It's just a lot of work. Okay, this is a piece I'm working on right now.
Wow.
Most of my work, I just start with it out of my head. Sometimes I sit down and plan it on paper, but this is a piece that I turned it, I didn't have anything to look at, and then I just sat down and drew the leaves out freehand, and then I use a Fortum and remove all the excess
Really?
wood.
Wow.
So this one's really in its infancy, and it hasn't had a whole lot done to it yet.
How many hours will you get into this piece?
Well, since I'm carving the back side too, I'll probably have 80 to 140, something like that.
Now, what's this sitting on?
Well, this is sitting on an old drawing table, but this lets me move my work so that I can lock it in any position so that I can work on it with both hands.
That's really cool.
So that's something, if you're going to do carving, you got to have both hands to carve with.
Right. Well, Ron, before we go, there are just a couple more pieces I want people to see. And this is one of the most incredible carving pieces I've ever seen.
This piece is out of redwood burl, and I've got over 400 hours in it, and it's mostly the water that the dragons are jumping out of. But they're kind of just dancing around the piece. There's 8 different dragons, and they're all friendly. They're not mean dragons.
Well, when I look down here now, I see one of your pieces in wood, and I see it also in bronze. Well, that's heavy.
Yeah, bronze is heavier than wood, and I've just started trying to open up other avenues, and this is a bronze that we had cast from that, and I'm also in the process of doing leaded crystal, and this is a piece that I've had cast in leaded crystal.
That is incredible.
And
So you're always redefining yourself.
I'm always redefining myself, and I'm always pushing the limits. And I'm finding that I'm even pushing the limits of the people that are casting these for me. So
Well,
that gives them a challenge also.
I always say it's better to be leading than following.
That's right.
Well, Ron, I really appreciate having us in your house today.
Well, you're more than welcome. You can come back anytime.
Well, after a visit like that and seeing such impressive work, if you're not inspired now, I don't know what's going to get you going. And speaking of getting going, we've got to get back to the shop because we have a scoop to make. Okay, we've got our blank mounted between centers. I'm using a 4-prong drive and a live center on the tailstock end. We're using walnut today. It's a beautiful wood to work with. The blank is 6 inches long and about 2.5 inches square. If you notice, our scoop is just a touch over 4 inches long. Well, I need these extra 2 inches of wood because we're going to cut a tenon on one end to hold in the chuck to turn the whole thing. The other thing is I like to have a little bit of extra wood on either end to waste, just in case I decide to change or modify the shape or if I find a defect in the wood. Now we're ready to start roughing this out. Get your eye protection. Make sure that the piece is not going to hit the tool rest. And we're going to grab our roughing gouge and turn the lathe on at a slow speed. And now pick the speed up. And we start cutting. Make sure you take light cuts as you start out. Remember, you're turning air, you're just catching the corners in the beginning. You want your hands and your body to work as a unit, so shift your weight to move the tool. Once you've worked on the right side for a while, now start cutting to the left side. Remember, as long as you have those corners there, you don't want to work from the end inwards because you could get a catch. Okay, I think we're close to being rounded out. By resting your tool up there, if it bounces, you know you're not round. And that's smooth, so we know we're rounded out. Let's take a look at it. Oh, well, we got a problem. If you look right here, this is not a black streak. This is a wormhole. So I need a smooth surface for this project, so we're going to have to turn this down a little bit more. That's why it's important to have a little extra wood when you're doing a project. Now that we're close to being rounded out, you can work from the edge inward. And so we're going to make long passes across to make our cylinder. Let's see how that did. That looks good. Yep, wormhole's gone. Now what we want to do is take a parting tool and start making the tenon for the chuck. The first cut is to flatten the end of the blank. Now I'm going to make the tenon, and it's going to be about a 1/4 inch long. Since my parting tool is an 1/8 inch wide, I just need to make 2 passes to create the tenon. Since the jaws on my chuck are beveled, I need to angle the tenon in just a bit for a good fit. We've got the chuck on the lathe, the tailstock is gone because we're going to do some hollowing in a minute. Take our tenon, put it inside the jaws, tighten it down. Really good. Now, the next thing we're going to do is shape the outside of the scoop. I need this for a template for when we hollow the inside. You can see that the blank is a bit out of round, and that's from remounting it. I'm going to take my roughing gouge here. I'll just take a few passes to make a nice smooth surface again. There. The next thing I have to do is true up the end with a parting tool. That way I have a good straight rim. Now, ready to take the spindle gouge and we'll start shaping the scoop. Basically, the shape of the scoop is just a large fat bead. So I'm just going to round over towards the end here, working from the inside out. And then I'm going to come back and start making a bead on the back end, which will be the part which meets up with the handle. And you're going to have to come in from both sides to clear out enough wood so you can keep making the shape. Now don't take any more wood off because we need that support for when we do the hollowing. You could wait until you've hollowed the scoop out to sand the outside of the piece, but since thin wood is more likely to crack from heat buildup, I'm going to go ahead now and sand the outside. Now before we get started hollowing, we need to drill a hole in the center of the scoop. That makes it easier to remove the rest of the wood. You can do it many ways, but we're going to use a spindle gouge. I need to make a couple of cuts across the face of the blank to get ready to make the hole. This also gets rid of any torn grain I might have. I'm going to start slowly cutting inward towards the center of the blank. And now I'm going to swing the handle and I'm going to be pointing straight into the blank and start pushing the tool in. Make sure you pull the tool out to clear the chips as you do this. If it stops cutting, just wiggle the handle up and down and it'll start cutting again as you push. To hollow, we're going to use this homemade scraper. And if you notice, there's a bevel on the tip. Well, that's what's called a negative rake, and it makes the tool a lot less aggressive. I've set my tool rest to where the tool is going to be slightly above center to make this cut. I've also increased the speed of the lathe, and I'm just going to take small passes and nibble the wood away. Once I've gone in a little bit, I'm going to move over and work my way to almost the final thickness of the wall. As you work your way towards the side, leave the walls just a bit thicker than you need. We're going to come back with a different scraper in a little bit and clean that up. Every now and then, stop the lathe and check the wall thickness with your calipers. You want a uniform thickness as you're cutting. Now when you take your calipers and shut them down on the wood, that's probably the thinnest point. Don't go shoving them because it'll start scratching the outside. So I always open them up just a bit and I slide them and watch and see if this gap gets larger or smaller. And right now it starts to get smaller right about here, so I just have a little more to take off there, and then I'll keep on working my way down. Now I've hollowed halfway down into the scoop, and I'm going to take my round nose scraper with a negative rake on it and take the walls down to their final thickness. If I did this later after it was hollowed out all the way, I'd get way too much vibration. In order to leave the smoothest tool finish possible, just use light pushing and pulling cuts. Once you get the wall thickness to where you want it, just alternate between the two scrapers and continue to hollow the rest of the scoop out. Okay, now we're ready to sand. The first thing I want to do is shape the lip of the scoop. It needs to be rounded off so it can scoop. So once we're done with that, then we're going to sand the inside down to 320 grit. Now our next step is to remove this excess wood so we can start turning the handle. You notice this mark here, that is the bottom of my scoop, so I don't want to get too close to that. We'll start with our parting tool and start removing the wood. Now I'm going to switch to my spindle gouge and start shaping the handle. Basically, the end of the scoop is a bead, so I'm working my way back in light cuts. Just make sure you don't go through the wall. Now we have the scoop shaped exactly the way we want it, and all that's left is making a simple handle for it. I'm going to use my spindle gouge for that. As always, just take light cuts and work from the highest point down to the lowest point. Now sand everything down to 320 grit. Before we part this off, I want to put a finish on. We're going to use mineral oil. And just rub that in, get a nice good coat on there and let it soak in. I really like using mineral oil because it's food safe and it's a very common oil. So if somebody wants to reapply the finish, it's easy to find. And don't forget the inside. Now, start the lathe and bring it up to high RPMs. We want to wipe the excess oil off with our paper towel. And now take some beeswax and apply it to the wood. And with a clean paper towel, melt in the wax. Using your spindle gouge, part the scoop off. Well, I've gone ahead and sanded the end and applied a little bit of oil. But how do I get this to this? Well, you could take it to the bandsaw and cut this off, but that'd be a little bit dangerous. So the way I did it was I got myself a piece of MDF board, I cut it into a circle, attached a faceplate to it, and with some spray adhesive, put some 80 grit sandpaper on here. You mount this on your lathe, and when you turn your lathe on, you have a large sanding pad. You just hold the scoop up to it then, and sand away the wood. It's a little bit slower than the bandsaw, but you have a whole lot more control over the shape and it's a lot safer. Now just a little bit of hand sanding, a little bit of oil, and we're done. Well, that's the scoop on scoops, and I think this project turned out very nicely. I hope you enjoyed it. So until the next time on the Woodturning Workshop, keep turning.